Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the So Emotional podcast. I am your host, Angela Wetzel, founder of Epic Initiator Coaching. Also, we have with us today Nick Carl, founder of the Safe Anchor Somatic Coach, and a very special guest today, Dr. Jenny Rain. So excited I can call you that. I knew her before she was a doctor, but she was always a doctor in my heart because she's brilliant, like incredible, all the things. And I'm actually jealous of how like productive you are. Like if I could just be like a tiny amount of that, I don't know, I'd be winning all kinds of awards and stuff. So, but let me go ahead and introduce you and then we'll dive right in. And yes, after a wake of failed relationships in her own life and 30 years in the trenches of corporate, nonprofit, and ministry work, Dr. Jenny finally got serious about learning what does and does not work in relationships. I like how you finally got serious. Like, you were just fucking around before.
Think about it.
She even got a PhD in psychology and a master's in divinity. I guess that means you stop fucking around now.
Exactly.
Along the way, and is currently enrolled in a dual master's in marriage and family therapy and professional clinical counseling. Dr. Jenny's passion is helping people just like you clear the path for love and healthy relationships. Welcome, Dr. Jenny Rain.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for being here. I remember meeting you. It was over almost a year and a half ago. And one of the things I just really, the impression you made on me was I was like, holy shit. Like this woman has studied and really like dove into all of these things. And maybe we'll talk about this later, but your own life, studying religion based on some of the traumas and pains and like how that ideology didn't really help so much and how it doesn't always help people. But like we dive in and ask our guests early on, at what point, I know you said you finally got serious here, but at what point were you, I forgot to do on the So Emotional podcast, like the whole purpose of this, we really like to remove the stigma and enigma around relationships. So we like to get in and talk about, for you personally, like when was it where you were like, holy shit, emotions, like, wait a second, that.
I think for me, it's funny that, I always say like we learn best what we try and teach to others. So I had really spent my life teaching, groups about emotions. Like I was known as the leader who would always show up at a group and she would bring the emotions chart. And I can remember doing that all the way back to like 2007, right? I would show up and I would like, these are your emotions, point to the one you're feeling, and the funny thing is I had no access to my emotional state at that point. I had no access to, even the sussing out between emotions and sensations. And it wasn't really until 2000, probably 16, 17, 18, I went on this journey, landed in really an emotional healing journey, landed in California and literally had tried everything with relationships. I have 2 failed marriages, which are a success that they are failed. I have had a wake of relationships that weren't successful. Like this was my sticking point in my life. It was always relationships. And in 2018, I landed in a coach's world and she was a relationship coach. And I'm like, this is it. I am going all in on this course. I am going to do the things that she says. I'm going to get in touch with the heart emotions. And if this doesn't work, that's it. I'm going to never look back and think about love again. So I did the things. At the same time, I hired a therapist. So I was in this like thera coaching space and I went deep with things and I found emotions I didn't even know I had. And shortly thereafter, I met my now fiance. and we had to learn to talk about emotions, which was awkward. And really all of that work then got really real. And through the experiential of that in the relationship, through the learning, everything changed. So
Did you have a particular moment where you were actually like, oh shit, I'm not feeling? How did you know you weren't feeling, even though you were the one bringing the chart? Because your story's scarily reminding me of me, where I'm like, I'm an actor, so I'm great with emotions. I'm feeling all of them.
I had this perfect mask of emotions, right? I could tell you what I was supposed to be feeling in that moment. And I could tell you what I was contextually determining was the right emotion, but I wasn't in my body. It was like there was this part of me that was my intellect, and then there was this part of me that was the thing that was supposed to feel, but there was a block that was right here. And part of it was I didn't know how to talk about or label my emotions. And so I would get into a feeling and then, I would try and numb it away with activity or, a glass of wine or sugar or something because I didn't know what to do with the feeling that was coming up. And that does not work in relationships. Like you cannot go into relationships as a disembodied being because those emotions are still going to drive what you're doing. And so through the process of really taking what I was learning about emotions from the coach and then sitting with Greg and saying, I'm having a feeling right now. And he's like, so I'm hearing you're having a feeling, and just allowing those feelings to exist. And then not sometimes being able to name them for 2 days. And that process really started to unlock the feelings aren't going to take me out. The feelings aren't going to crash my relationship. They're actually designed to alert me to when something isn't right. And he had to learn it too, because both of us were professional emotional bypassers. So,
Wow. Oh my God, that's so brilliant. And I like the way that you said that because it's a lot of, I work with a lot of high achievers. And I also just know in high achieving, it's like, I got that way because I was emotionally numb and I had to learn how to perform from here and get shit done. And then I didn't know why my relationships weren't working
yeah.
because I was like,
And
yeah,
And the thing that I tell all my clients is the one thing you don't have to do if you're over intellectualizing is you don't have to feel up here. So you can mimic doing the work without actually doing the work because you're like, I know the steps to take to process the thing, but you're not actually dropping into the body where the thing resides because that's too scary to access, right? The pain is too scary because if you were raised in a family that didn't normalize emotions and didn't normalize having big, even medium feelings, you don't know what the hell to do as an adult. You don't know, you think that they're bad. And then you self-select into a high control religion where they're teaching you things like feelings aren't facts and the feelings are the caboose. And it's like, well, maybe, but they're a part of our divinely orchestrated design. And so they're here to teach us stuff. And oh, by the way, Jesus wept. You know what I mean? So it's like, why aren't we accessing these emotions? So
right.
it was really hard for me to, you know, feel safe enough to drop in to those places.
If you were to describe the sweet spot of what it's actually like to feel your emotions versus intellectualizing them, kind of like how, sometimes women joke like that they need to give their man a map to find the clitoris and how you let him know if you've found the spot. Like how would you explain how do you know when
Exactly
you're
like that.
actually feeling and doing it?
Yeah, exactly like that. So my process, one of the processes I teach my clients somatic mapping is, okay, start in your body. and they'll usually start describing what's happening. And I'm like, that's a great thought. What are you feeling? And they'll describe it some more. And I'm like, okay, where is the feeling happening? And if some people cannot get there, they're like, well, I'm feeling it in my head. I'm like, okay, great. Put your hand there and put your hand on your stomach or your heart because something, all the energy is here. So you've got to drop them into their body. Some people can get like, oh, my chest feels tight. Or after a few minutes, my back, gosh, I'm feeling this horrible pain in my back. Great. Was it there a minute ago? Well, I think it was, but maybe I didn't notice it. And so starting with the sensation, because usually people can get to sensations first. I feel tight, I feel hot, I feel constricted. And then, okay, great. Behind that sensation, what's the emotion? What's the emotion that's happening? It feels bad. Great. Tell me more about bad. What does bad feel like? And then you can usually start to suss out the emotions. And then from there, a lot of times what will happen is that emotion will differentiate, right? Oh, there's sadness and grief. Great. Which one do you want to work with today? And that's how you kind of lead people, move them through those emotions, starting in the body, which is usually the last place they want to go.
Yeah.
Because it's hard, right? Especially if you're not used to feeling, and then you've got a coach opposite you or a therapist who's like, let's feel the emotions. It's like,
Right. And it's also like I'm watching you and I'm
yes,
attuning to you, and they're like, no one's ever like looked at me,
yeah,
let alone pursued me and asked me how I was feeling. And suddenly it can feel like a laser beam. I'm like, let's get vulnerable. Do you want to cry?
yeah,
Have
yeah,
at it. Let's do it.
right?
And they're just like, no, fuck that. And then I
Yeah.
see the tap dancing come out. They're like, can we like just talk about anything else?
And I always watch that, right? And that's when I'll pull in, okay, so you've got a wigglepotamus part, which tells me that we're getting to the core of something that's going on because you're wiggling and usually it's the bottom half, right? So it's below the navel. There's the bottom half that's wiggling because their body is sending energy to try and ground and to try and root and to try and find something to grab onto because it's so uncomfortable. So you'll see this simultaneous wigglepotamus happen, and then also the shallow breathing. And then they'll start to locate, right? Am I safe? Am I safe? And I let them do it. I'm like, great, let's look to the left. Let's look to the right. Okay, let's come back to that part. What's happening? Oh, it's growing or it's shrinking or, so
Mm-hmm.
some people, especially if they've been raised in homes where the unspoken rules are don't talk, don't feel, don't ask for help, they have zero access to their body. So even just normalizing the wiggles are normal,
Mm-hmm.
ear is normal.
The sighing or the yeah, the noises or the fidgeting or the flushing or whatever. Yeah, the eyes looking around anywhere else, self-soothing,
Yes, I
pulling
see
on
that.
the yeah, soothing. It's okay.
Twisting the hair, yeah, all the things. Well, and what's really interesting is, you know, sitting in the practitioner space, and I'm sure you have both had this experience too. When you start to emotionally tune into that heart resonance and their body resonance, a lot of times you'll pick up on the emotion before the other person. And so that's when it gets really interesting, right? When you can say to the person, I've had times where I've said to a client, I'm feeling a piercing in my ear. And then I come to find out that, you
Mhm.
know, that has resonance within the client's family, or my heart is feeling warm. What's going on? What's happening for you? It may just be me, but yeah, that's when it gets really fun. Like, oh my God, I'm feeling that too. Yes, we're on to something.
With all the different kinds of people that you've sat with in this space and in this direction of where you're trying to push into, right? I look at all these different people and I try to imagine. Um, so of the different people I've sat with, you feel like some people can take this direction, feel these things, and then begin to go down into this path, right? Now you just get to like see how different people react specifically to this, right? Because I don't know, it's like an operating system that has been operating the entire time, right? That is ever vigilant all the time, right? And then if you, for some people, if you ask them to, okay, I'm going to take you into, we're going to try to get into your body, right? But if somebody's entire life has been, their whole system is to not do that, right?
Yep.
You can, sometimes you can just take like half a step and then you're already kind of stuck.
Yeah.
And
One more.
that gets a little tricky, before like, if we just even want to like hold still or like, just begin to feel because like, just one client I could think of, like his face just starts like, doing all sorts of, and I know that we're already kind of stuck, and then so I just think it's very interesting how uh, different people's systems and how quickly it acts, right? Like it is super quick.
Yeah. Well, they get in that container of support, right? The when it's the attunement frame where all of a sudden we are holding space for them to feel so that they can then bridge into the access to that feeling. But then, yeah, immediately the resistance comes up, or it comes up in different ways, right? So they'll be vulnerable in that session, and then all of a sudden they will miss the next two, right? Or
Mm.
they will change the schedule, or they will, it's either the cry and attach where they'll try and move forward, or it's the I need
Out
to
of
run.
here.
Yeah. Men are interesting. I've had some men be able to get better access than some of my female clients, but the resistance afterwards to that vulnerability is so interesting to watch because men are not given the gift of being able to be vulnerable in our world, and
Mm.
so when they have the opportunity to get vulnerable and do it, it's like, oh, now what do I do? So yeah, I agree. The resistance is futile, but it's it's
It's
interesting to
also
watch.
real, right?
It is.
Jenny, I was wondering if you want to, I would love for you to talk more about some of your background, if you'd like to, and what caused you to study all the various things that you've studied, because you're just like a fucking treasure trove of knowledge and all these cool things. And I just remember like having my mind blown by what you were talking about, like some things in the Bible and how you actually went back to the direct, like closest translation before it, you know, had several iterations like out. And I was just like, oh my God. And I don't even remember what it was we talked about specifically, but I was like mind blown.
I think for me, so I grew up with two dads. I have a mom and a stepdad, and then I've got two dads. So, two sides of my family, because back in the ancient days of the 70s and the 80s, like you got married whether you were gay or not. And so my dad didn't come out until later. And I was on my own kind of spiritual journey. My dads have been together for 47 years now. And I was also at one point deeply involved in an evangelical church where I'm sure you can imagine I was hearing about how my father was an abomination and how my dads were living in sin. And yet they were the best relationship in my life. 47 years is no joke. And they have been through it. They went through AIDS together. I mean, neither one of them had AIDS, but they went through the AIDS crisis together. They worked with Whitman Walker Clinic and lost basically like two-thirds of their friends because that was the reality of the 80s. And they made it through some really perilous times. They've made it through addiction. They've made it through a lot of pain. And I'm like, this is a model relationship for me that the church is saying to me is demonic. What's wrong here? And so I finally got sick of the pastors telling me what the Bible said. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go learn Hebrew and find out for myself. And so I did. And I found out not only like I went through a program called the Reformation Project, in 2017, where we dove really deep into the language, but I had already gotten my seminary training before that. And really what I found is when you get into the original language, it says a whole bunch of shit that none of the pastors are talking about. It says a whole bunch of stuff about creation, which I talked about in my dissertation. It says a whole bunch of stuff about Adam and Eve, which actually, before there was Adam and Eve, there was Adam, and Adam is humankind, and God is they in Genesis initially. And so none of that is talked about from the pulpit, because, especially in conservative pulpits, because it's too, there's an ideology of how the family should exist, and it doesn't involve the LGBTQ community. And so therefore these the original translations can't really be talked about, because, oh my God, it would make space for, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and that could be very bad for the church,
Right.
So I started because I got sick of people telling me what the Bible said, and I wanted to go back and find out for myself. And then from there, it just kind of took off. I've always wanted to, I'm in school right now to be a clinical counselor, because I've always wanted to be a clinical counselor. I love coaching. I love the forward thinking, and I'm called into counseling. I want to do the deep trauma work. I want to do the deep relationship work. And so, now I can work with people who have relationship wounds and religious trauma wounds and all of the things. So that's kind of a little
Yeah.
back.
It's so wild to hear people talk about the destruction of the nuclear family, but if you look at the patriarchy and the church, already it was Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and like Mary was just like, "Thank you so much for carrying the child. Now get out of the way.
Yeah.
Goodbye." And then there's just not been space for any other configuration, really, of women, of daughter, mother, Holy Spirit. And then even the separation of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, where it was like the woman, it's like all the healthy relationships were taken out.
Yeah.
And then even, yeah.
No, and women were that's my dissertation after Eve was all about that. It was about how women are depotentiated through fundamentalist explanations of what the Bible really says, right? And there is a depotentiation through from patriarchy's rule all the way through its most recent expression in the evangelical church of how women are not at the elevation of men. And you can see it all through the scripture. You can see it in how, women are treated. And I wrote all about that. So
What's wild is also that Mary was impregnated by God, not even a man. So there was no like actual human sex happening either, which is very interesting. If you like actually analyze all of it, you're like, what?
well, and also in the Garden of Eden, that woman came from man, right? So Isha from Ish, man is Ish, Isha is woman. That's an inversion of how birth happens, right? We all come from a woman, and yet in the Garden of
Well,
Eden,
except for the first one.
yeah. So
Right.
it's
And we all know that to be true.
The egg definitely came before the chicken in this manner.
I love it. So there's all kinds of things that, we have been taught from second source all the way through school, all the way through churches, all the way through, life, that it is patriarchally constrained. So, and it depotentiates women.
Right. Because if women were to know their power and that they were maybe important in the role of life somehow, and maybe what they were teaching their sons and their daughters and whatever, like, we might be in trouble because the world would be a healthier, more fun place.
Would
Wouldn't that be
definitely
terrible?
It would definitely be more holistic. And I think
Yeah.
this is where, if you really want to improve relationships, You know, you guys talk about emotions. We talk about emotions because emotions are typically associated with women, the feminine, right? And if the feminine is depotentiated, emotions are depotentiated, which what then happens to relationships? Relationships don't become what they can be. So as we elevate women, the relationships that they can then step into also improve, right? Because it's a meeting of two equals, different roles, but equals, right? Instead of a hierarchical
Yeah.
things.
I think that's why it's so important to honor people and the way that they interact, like their first, the first way that they want to engage, because often men are a little bit more intellectual. Of course, like all the women and men that I work with are all that way. Uh, because of my own stuff, I just like draw that type of person to me. But to know that there's a way in through either of those, because they're actually inextricable.
Yeah.
And then, of course, different societies, cultures, Western culture specifically, like we really amplify the mind and the intellect and all things logical. And then when it comes to the intuition and emotions, it's like, oh, that's a bunch of like woo woo, crazy
Yep.
stuff. Like it's not to be trusted. Come to find out that all decisions that are actually made are, they found out, surprise, surprise, it's all intellectual anyway. And if you pretend that the intellect is the master or the only master without acknowledging that intuitions and emotion is actually the thing that's like leading in a lot of ways. And I like to say, if we don't know who's driving what, then your emotions and your parts are driving your relationship bus into the ditch, because there's no guidance, like there's no cooperation, and then there's no like mutual respect. And I know as a woman, like if someone doesn't acknowledge my feelings, like I know they're not always correct, but if they're not acknowledged, like I feel deeply disrespected. And I know often for men, if you don't validate their thoughts and their feelings, that feels like deep disrespect. And it's like we need both to have healthy relationships, and we need to honor and respect both
I
too.
agree.
So it's not like let's bring on the emotions and like fuck the intellect. It's like,
Right.
well, let's get
It's
them to work together.
Yeah, it's the blend. I have a one of my colleagues, Sarah, she's amazing. Um, she uses it's called nonviolent communication. It's been around forever. And I have watched her in conflict situations de-escalate them like that because she has this way of doing exactly what you just said. Like identifying both the thoughts, validating the thoughts, and immediately validating the underlying feelings. And you can literally watch the temperature of the person go, oh my gosh, I feel seen and heard and known. And it's like, gosh, if we could do that in our relationships, like we could change the world. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Like let's teach that in school instead of algebra. Just saying.
I
For
know,
sure.
right? For some reason, this like popped into my head, but do you ever watch anything with like a read John Bradshaw?
Mm-mm.
Healing the Shame That Binds You. Like he had
Oh
this
yeah.
whole,
Yes.
he's like so incredible. Anyway, I've been like following and studying his work for a long time, but he had this PBS special about healing the inner child or healing the child within. But I don't know why it's popped into my head, but I listen to the language and the words that are used around explaining the rightness or the wrongness of something. And he does such an incredible job of being very sensitive and attuned. But he says something like the inner children can like it wasn't even sabotage. It was basically like if the inner children are left to run the show, they're gonna like fuck everything up. And like oh, I wish I could think of the word, but I immediately felt like, oh, like just this feeling of those inner children are not trying to ruin, to fuck anything up or destroy or be it was like a nuisance or something like that. A menace. I think it was like a menace. And I was like, I can totally see how someone in this frame of mind that is still looking at judgment or through a lens of shame or wrongdoing can say like either intellectually like that thought is dumb or that emotion is garbage. But anytime we do that, we're adding polarity in, like we're already adding victimization and shame into the dynamic. So I was just thinking about that. Like when you said the nonviolent communication, there's a way that we can be more sensitive to the words that we use that are non-polarizing, non-shaming, and ultimately engender way more compassion and acceptance for what is. Because it's not like I'm just controlling all my thoughts. Like I got a lot of thoughts that come in my brain that I'm like, whoa. And then same with feelings. Like I'm like, wow, I'm feeling this right now. I just am. Like, where did it come from? Instead of being like, no, that thought is dumb or wrong, or that feeling is just like way out of context.
Language is so important. And I think, being able to see our own emotions in the moment, like, and our own thoughts, like, think about relationships that you are in where things have gotten a little hot and all of a sudden you are like out here arguing or having conflict, but you've forgotten like what's going on in me that needs to be validated and seen and heard and known, because it's like we pivot to this, I got to defend myself instead of taking the time that we need to validate our own feelings and emotions. And I think that's so much of the work, in relationships is learning like I can start with myself. And once I get myself calmed down, then I can also be more careful, just like you said, with language and with the other person, with their heart, with all their parts, because I've done that work internally as well. But yeah, I think it is important to, compassionate welcome, radical acceptance in relationships, in love is so important because we are such a defended society. And so taking the walls down and just trying to be with what is without making stories or judgments about it's key to transforming relationships. So
Fit for Service had just come out with this documentary called Anti-Cult.
mhm.
And so I watched it this morning, and they were showing clips of like breath work and things. Actually, I was there last year. Like they were filming everything. So, and what I was realizing is externally, when we're seeing people that are processing emotion and different things through somatic work, breath work, like, I mean, even just through talking, parts work, all of that, it's like, it's so easy to look in on that and be like, wow, that looks crazy, insane, right? But if you realize that all of the things that are coming out are just like years of repression and suppression of all these different emotions, of so many moments and micro moments of emotions that were not felt or honored or witnessed in any way. So it's all compressed like a beach ball being held underwater. And then it's just like exploding above the water. So it, like, you can watch a person look like having 100 orgasms, or like screaming, beating the shit out of things, crying, tremoring, and it all looks insane. I'm using air quotes, but to polite society, because we shut everything down, push it down, lock it up, and we're like, see, I'm a good, safe, normal human. Look how normal I am. I'm good. And anyone
Meanwhile,
that's like too excited is like scary. If you go out in the world and you're like very happy, like people are gonna like look and be like, what are you on, or what is going on? And if you're too sad or too angry or too whatever, like people are like feeling unsafe with this like so-called unchecked, unbridled emotion. Like, just imagine what the world would be like if people could actually be really honest about how they were feeling, but knew how to take responsibility for it in such a way that they weren't just reacting and following through with behaviors based on those emotions. So not going around stabbing or shanking people, but actually saying, I'm feeling really angry right now. Really angry. Really sad.
and that feels like so much of the secret sauce of relationships, right? Just naming what's happening, regardless of what the other person does or doesn't do, just being able to name the reality of the experience that you're in the moment. And it's like, if we can do that, how much less cathartic work through breath work and through all these healing things will we have to do 10 years down the road, you know? And so, and that's again why I think getting into the body to access those feelings is so critical, because you just gave a perfect case study of those feelings were emerging through the body, right? They were stuck in places in the body, and the body was pulling it out through breath work and through, you know, which they've said scientifically, I think does some of the same things as like what psychedelics do.
Mm.
And so the body was processing what it hadn't ever been allowed or able to process. And yeah, just think about if we could just go around talking about, hey, I'm feeling this, and get it out so that we wouldn't have to come back to it, you know, 10,
So it
15.
was funny. I was hanging out with my gal the other day, and she was having kind of a tough time, and she began to cry, and then I could see her fighting it off, and I was like, no, 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 it's here. Welcome. It's here. Let's be with it. It's okay. Like this is okay. It's good to cry. These things are here. Like there's so many like, and I do it all the time too, for sure. It's like I have a very quick reaction to negatively valenced emotions. They just come at a certain frequency that I have built-in circuits to like, nope, very quickly, right? And I have to be like, yep, catch that. Like I did feel that. That is here. It is connected to this, which is like it happens so quickly. But it is when I can catch it, it's just like, no, it's okay. It's okay for that to like be here and and to like to listen to it. It was some TikTok or something the other day, but I liked it. And it was like, here's how you feel your emotions, uh, properly. It was like feel them wherever they are in your body. And so I was like, whatever. I was eating dinner or something by myself, and so I was like feeling a thing. I was like, okay, it's in my throat and it's here. And then uh, get connected to what it was, what the emotions are, like name what they are, and then something about sort of remembering into the past, and could those things be your best friends? And that was kind of like, and I had to kind of do a little bit of like maneuvering because it was kind of like too on the nose. But then I was like, so I kind of imagined like a kid version of me or something. But it was the kid version of me who is my best friend, and that had these types of feelings. And so I was just like, and it happened all pretty quickly. But it's like one of the things that I try to do now. It's like, stop, feel it in my body, and then like imagine just for a second. It happens quickly, but like are those my friends? They are my friends. And that like just a little tweak on it, but it gets me away from valencing them into like, oh, this is a negative emotion. This is anger, whatever. These are things that are bad and things that I hate and things that I want to get away from. And it's like, no, no, this is me. These are me. And we want to receive them for what they have.
And it's amazing how much faster they can process through our bodies when we don't reject them. You know, I
Right.
don't think the emotion is the problem. I think the rejection of the emotion is the
Yes.
problem.
Yes.
Because when we suppress it, it fights to become bigger. You know, it's
Hmm.
like when a child has a tantrum at 2, right? It's like you try and calm them down, what's going to happen? They are going to implode, versus welcoming the emotion and realizing if you can contain it, not contain as in suppress, but contain as in hold,
Oh, right.
and create this beautiful experience with this emotion that will give you access to a part of you. That's why, you know, in the couples work that I do, it's really interesting to me because almost always, you know, who is it? Gottman says that 69% of couples problems are never resolved, right? So what happens is couples get into this like mirroring of each other, and then there's this loop of this same fight that happens. And what I find over and over and over again with the couples that I work with is that the thing that they are not wanting to see, that they are not welcoming in the other person, is the thing that is inviting them to work on in themselves. And when you can uncover, this is the mirror. This is the mirror of healing that you stepped into this relationship for. Are you going to welcome that uncomfortable emotion? Are you going to welcome the anger? Are you going to welcome the sadness? Are you going to welcome the fear? And what's even more interesting is once I see it in one partner, I can almost always see its corollary in the other partner, right? And it's like, so whereas this is showing up this way for you in this specific issue, it's showing up the same conversation your partner is having internally, but it's showing up as this issue. And as the longer you reject that, the more that pattern's going to stay entrenched. You welcome that, just like what you were saying, and the pattern then can show you what its purpose is. It can show you what it wants to heal, and then it starts to diffuse.
I had something come up like this in partnership where I felt like I was pleading to be validated. Like I was like, just validate my feelings, like just hold some space for me. And it was like this rejection of that. And what I realized is there was this unconscious emotional manipulation that was taking place where I wasn't validating my own feelings. So I was trying to get him to validate my feelings. And I remember the feeling of pulling on his energy, like, please validate me. And then I was like shaming him. Like there was a part of me that's like, such an asshole. Like you can't validate me, when it was all along inside, like I didn't know I could validate myself. And once I saw it, I was like, oh my God. And the emotional manipulation piece was like, if I could, I would do whatever it took to try to like show him in all the different ways that I was hurting. Like it was like, because I felt like it was just something I learned to do, to be like, how much do I have to embellish this so you see it, so you get it, but it never worked, and then it ended up backfiring. And when I finally saw that, I was like, oh my God. And then I just stopped doing it. I was like, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't need to pull. I don't need to push. I don't need, it was such a huge, like pivotal moment. But it's fascinating with the attachment styles. For the anxious attacher, like the avoidant is like there is the villain, it's the nemesis, like how dare you avoid me. But also it's like the call is always coming from inside the house, like the killer, they're inside the house, like you are avoiding your own feelings and you're making them responsible. And then the avoidant, they're being pursued by the anxious person, and they're like, oh my God, get away from me. But they don't know that they can implement their own boundaries and say, please, like, I need space, I need whatever, getting their needs met that way. But until that occurs, it's like we just have this vilification of one or the other attachment style, which, by the way, I believe everyone's got both, or, all of it, really. So it's just fascinating to watch, like, the merry-go-round of the same issue. That it's like in spirituality, I like to say, if you smelt it, you dealt it, works in spirituality. It is not always true with farts.
Yes.
Because, like people are just like, oh, if it's like, no, I didn't. But in terms of like emotional stuff or spirituality, like if you're smelling it, like the part of you is dealing it already. And it's just like finding out how.
It's interesting as you were saying that, I started thinking like, so you've got an anxious and an avoidant, right? So this is the anxious, this is the avoidant. The anxious is trying to get the needs met from the avoidant who is running, but she's being avoidant internally.
Yes.
So it's like, and then I wonder with the avoidant if there's an anxious inside of him. So it's
Yes, the anxious inside of them that they actually numb with substances and coping strategies. So their inner emotions are anxious, a lot of anxiety, and they're being pursued internally, and they're like, no, no, no.
they're numbing. Yeah. I had never seen attachment styles like that before until kind of you were just talking about it, that we have an external style, but that we also may have the opposite internal,
And they
and
actually continue to flip.
yeah,
Like you know how our parts, they become like fractalized and they go on in infinity? It's like we flip attachment styles on in infinity, like down. It's really wild.
Yeah, I will. And I think just like every part of us has a self energy at its core, I wonder, does each part of us have its own attachment style?
I think so. Because like if you do the graph, like if you like I like yourpersonality.net for the attachment style quiz just because it plots it on a graph.
Yeah.
And in the upper left-hand quadrant, you have the dismissive aspect. In the top right, you have fearful. In the bottom right, you've got anxious or preoccupied. And then on the bottom left, you have secure. So it will plot your relationship to your mother, your father, or that energy.
That's
It will
awesome.
plot your partner. It will plot your friends and general attachment. And all of those can be in different places based on your relationships. And then you start to realize from that, people have these layered relationships with men, with women, based on their traumas and who people remind them of. Because it's not necessarily even gender anymore. Sometimes it's just the energy of feeling pursued
Yeah.
can make someone who has an anxious attachment, or I'm sorry, more avoidant attachment, feel that and just like conflate that with their mother or whoever was the one that was infringing on their boundaries.
Yeah. It's definitely energy, I think, over gender because I've had experiences where like somebody has reminded me of a parent, but it's opposite gender. And it's like, why am I getting all wrapped around the axle here? Oh, this is the same energetics.
Mhm.
So yeah, I like that that you mentioned that nuance. I'll have to, the last time I took a attachment quiz, I was shocked. I always thought I was disorganized. I actually came out heavily avoidant. And I'm like, wow, is this just like my old age? Or I know attachment styles can change over time, but I never in a million years would have thought. So I was like, okay, something's flawed in the data. So I'll go to yours and I'll
I
test.
think like I just view attachment as dynamic. So I think it reflects like where we are in the moment, and maybe even what part you're in when you're taking that, and like the amount of awareness. Sometimes people take it from, well, this is who I want to be. Sometimes the first time you take it, it looks pretty secure, not so bad. But once you start to shine that light of awareness on it, the next time you take it, it might actually look a lot worse just because you're simply more aware of it. And it's really hard to say because it depends on the questions, it depends on a lot of things. But I do recommend that one, and that's one that I work with clients on.
I'll definitely look because I've been looking for a good attachment quiz that gives just kind of like some good data. So
Yeah, and you can plot it over time, and it does. It also tracks different things. Like it'll tell you if you're high or low, based on the averages for dismissive or anxiousness or whatever. Yeah, it's pretty
cool.
cool. I like it a lot.
I love it. I don't know if you can hear the landing strip that is our air conditioning. I hope you can't. It is like it's
I hear
103 right
I
now.
hear a little
So
ticky ticky thing, but it's not
yeah,
bad. Not
that
bad.
good. That's the air conditioning. So
Hey Jenny, I was curious. Angela sent me a couple of things. It was sort of what we were talking about. OB, is that what you called it?
UB,
OB, UB, whatever.
bees. Yeah.
UB, right? And
I'm so
I
glad you
started
brought this up. I really wanted to talk about it.
I started reading a little bit of the book, so I got the book, and I have to say that I'm an audiobook guy. My ears are my strong suit, and it's all play acted, and people really hate it. So I'm like conditioning myself for like it's gonna be bad. Just get through it for the information. But um, in parts work, I've done. There's kind of, I guess, like classical or like first order parts, of like dropping into your body and then kind of like starting to dialogue with an emotion or something. Okay. And that seems pretty well, maybe, and I might be kind of a different case because parts work for me has always been kind of tough because my parts sometimes will laugh. There's not a lot of real dialogue that happens because they're pretty mad, you know. especially the ones we get in contact with. But a part that I have come across recently, well, there's kind of two questions. So first, it was all of this idea of that everybody has some amount of like, maybe this is not a universal, maybe it's not everybody, but people have amounts of shame. And the kind of shame of like, I am bad meat, I'm a bad person, I'm like a bad, like I am badness, I am reprehensible. If you see me, you will be disgusted. Is that universal? Does everybody have some kind of relationship with that?
It's interesting. In shame and guilt are such interesting emotions to work with. Um, and I think if you put it in the lens of parts work, when I start hearing language like, I am bad, I am, you know, unworthy, whatever, there's typically some level of a blended part. So what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll try and separate the part, get a little distance, right? Like, can you get a little bit of distance from that? Can that part step back a little bit, and once you can get the part that is over identified with shame to unblend, to pull apart, to give some distance, then the self energy can step in and the person can get a sense of who they are apart from the I am shame. I have worked, whether or not people can identify something as shame, I do believe it is a ubiquitous experience, right? For everybody. It's people who don't have a level of shame and guilt that usually get, categorized in the sociopathic or
Right.
you know what I mean? So there is a level of shame that is a motivator or guilt that is a motivator. It's always better. I always try and work with people to get them to guilt versus shame, because guilt, you can say I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. But even if that language is coming up with clients, right? The I am bad, I'm worthless, whatever. If you can pull out, okay, there's a blend there. If you can pull and get a little bit of distance between the highest self energy of the person, the part of them that is calm, compassionate, creative, loving, giving, it's whatever the 8 C's, I should know these, but the 8 C's of IFS,
Mhm.
if you can suss out that part, then the person can start to interact with the part. Usually it's a really young part, and see what the part needs. Like, what do they need in this moment? What do they need from you? Do they know you're there? You know,
Mm.
you had mentioned earlier when you try and drop into your parts, like, um, they'll laugh or whatever. Sometimes what happens is as you're accessing one part, another part will come in and block it, right? So you've got to ask that, hey, can the part of you that's laughing give you a little distance so that we can deal with this part? Or does the laugher need some attention? And
Mm.
then you start sussing out, who is that part of you? What do they need? Why are they laughing? What are they afraid of?
Yeah.
My experience of parts is when you start getting to the core of a deep emotion with a person, the system is like, I'm going to flood the
Right.
system,
Hmm.
right? I'm going to flood the system with all these other emotions. And so, as a practitioner, our job is to, okay, let's ask that part to step back, and that part and that part.
I
So
wanted to I want to come back to this, but I was just going to drop in here because I know we reference a couple things that we didn't say what they were. So the UBs are unattached burdens, which in IFS they're basically parts that aren't necessarily considered parts, but maybe emotions, maybe belief systems, certain things that are not necessarily like belonging to a personality aspect, and then the book that I had sent to Nick that I thought he would be really interested in was by Robert Falconer, which was called The Others Within Us. And there was a whole reason why we got onto that, but we may or may not talk about that. But go ahead.
well, the
Proceed.
reason why I brought it up is because it's an actual physical sensation of when I have tried to do parts work, and and I would say kind of the limited amount that I've been successful with here, right? But then there's also a much more present thing, which are they are emotions, and then they register as physical sensations, but they feel like they come from outside and press in upon me, right? So that was close to that of being UB,
Yeah.
Hmm.
right? So I also sometimes at nighttime wake up and I'm super scared and I think that there's things in the room, right? So like this could also be a part that is manifesting in this particular type of way, trying to get some sort of attention, right? And it comes as like I feel like there's things in the room, and I'm totally like down with this idea of like your internal parts can come up with really fascinating ways to try to get messages into you. But the selfish reason why I'm bringing this up is that so I went and did some ayahuasca in Costa Rica a few months ago, right? And the very first thing that comes to me, which I definitely am blended with, was this deep, deep, deep fear. It's like this hold on for dear life because they're gonna extinguish our flame or whatever familiar sense of myself is about to be sniffed out, and we're never gonna let go of that. And it
Mm.
just becomes so blended. And then yesterday, had a little substance, and the exact same feeling shows up, and then I'm like remembering it was very mild yesterday, but I'm remembering every time I've like touched any type of psychedelic that this same part comes, and it's like a really hot, like potent, just like terror, like
Yeah.
fear. And it was just like interesting, and I was thinking to myself, trying to feel what that is. I'm like, well, it's a fear of what? And I assumed it was a fear of like the shame that I could be getting close to or something like that. I don't know.
It
Uh,
could it
yeah.
it could be your natural, like the fascinating thing about healing, and I think that the thing that the therapeutic world doesn't allow space for because it's not scientifically provable or whatever, but that they are starting to create space for is that you are a body of energy that is impacted by other energies, right? And so if you have a generational lineage, which we all do, you are still living out generational energies, right? You know, they've proven that our grandmothers carried our mothers and us in the cells of their body, right? When your mother births you, she still carries your cells the entire time she's on this earth. And so we are carrying our ancestral energetics through multiple lines. And so one of the questions I always ask in parts work, you know, and this is a little bit of the clinical intuition that I bring to the sessions. A lot of times we'll get to a place in uh, the work, and I'll just get this sense what is in front of them right now or what's alongside of them right now, I don't think is theirs. And so I will ask the question, you know, they'll say, I'm feeling anger. And something about it to me feels very disconnected. And I will ask, is it yours? Do you feel connected to it? No, it's not mine. Great. So then I know it's a parental interject, or it's a generational interject, or it's a generational energetics that have passed through the line. And so then I'll pop into constellation healing and we'll do that, or I'll do the unburdening process with within IFS, or we'll do some interject work, so this is real in healing, right? I've had healing sessions where guides have showed up. I have had healing sessions where healing sessions where great grandmas have shown up, right? Or people on down the line that afterwards, when I do a debrief with my client, it's like, oh my gosh, I've been carrying the lineage of this, and it's showing up in my relationships. And all of those things are really real. So I think the question that you ask is, first of all, is it mine? And then if it is yours, where did it start? Right? Like, when was the first time that you felt like you were afraid of being in trouble? When was the first time you felt fear, and looking at some of those through your line. And if you can't go back far enough, then what happened in your parents' line and looking that way. The other piece of it is, I know in my own life, fear has been used to motivate me in different directions. I was hiking the Coosa Trail in Georgia when I lived there, and it's connected to the Appalachian Trail. And I was so excited to hike the Coosa, and I had been hiking all month and finally got to the Coosa. And no matter what I did, this freaking trail, it's like my nemesis. And I'm hiking along the trail. I'm all by myself. The lady at the front was like, "You're really going hiking all by yourself?" Yes, I am. Starting to hike. I'm about a mile and a half in, and I start feeling this fear. And I'm like, why am I feeling fear? And I'm looking around. I don't see a bear. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on? So I keep hiking, and the fear is almost crippling. And I'm stubborn. So I'm like, I'm going to keep going. All of a sudden, there's this massive tree in the path. So I'm like, it's fine. I can just climb over it. My fear is growing. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. It almost stopped me. It finally did stop me. And I was like, I don't know what it is. I just know that it is. And I did a 180. I started hiking back, and the fear was gone immediately. And I was like, this is all in my head. This is crazy. I turned back around to start hiking the Coosa Trail. The fear almost knocks me over. And at that point, I'm like, there is something that is bigger than me here. I don't know what it is. It might be a bear, but I'm getting the heck off this mountain. 2 months later, Meredith Emerson was hiking on the Appalachian Trail. She was attacked and murdered. Her dog ran off, and that's how they found their way back to her. She was less than like 500 yards from where I was. And a guy had been in the woods, literally like decapitated her. And, she is no longer with us. I am convinced to this day that that fear was there as my guide. And
Wow.
and so now how I bring that into healing sessions, I take I don't have to know what it is to know that it is, and that it matters to the system. And then I tread very carefully, pull in my guides if I need to, my higher power, and realize that, this stuff shows up. It's for our benefit sometimes. So
It's so interesting. I mean, well, holy shit. I'm so glad that didn't happen to you. I'm also very sorry that that happened to that woman. Like stuff like that is like terrible, terrible. But also like doing this work with emotions, it's like this discernment piece of how do we bring our consciousness into the present moment to then merge or at least like be aware of, attune to the feelings that are there, and then know, well, is this from higher self? Like, is this fear here to serve me in this way, like it was trying to protect you? Or is this fear coming from ego, where it's fear of annihilation, that I won't survive this, and that the ego believes it's going to die instead of actually knowing, because it doesn't know it will transform, because energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It will transform into something. So that's the piece that's it's really interesting to, it's like, how do you cultivate that kind of discernment to tell the difference? And like, I think in my experience, I'll feel desire to do something, like I'll feel inspiration, like I'll be like, ooh, I really want to do that. And then I'll feel all the fear come. It's like my chorus of parts are like, don't do that. We're not doing that. And then differently, it's like sometimes potentially you might feel really good about something, but if there's actual fear, it's like something is wrong.
yeah,
Like it's a different kind
it's
of feeling.
it's such a thin line, right? And I wrestled with that for months afterwards. I was like, did Meredith feel the fear when she was on near the Coosa Trail? Did she ignore it? Was it there for her? Like I really wrestled with that. for a long time. But it's when I started trusting that there were feelings that, that were bigger than me. It was not my fear. It was fear that was coming in from the outside that was trying to pivot me. And when you're working with Aya, right? Aya brings her own energetics. She is of the earth, right? She brings her own, you are called to do work with Aya, right? Most people feel called. And so there's a whole different mothering energy through that process. And so, yeah, it is, there are so many variations of how emotions can show up. The inside out emotions, the outside in emotions, the collective unconscious. You get me started talking about the depth psychology world, like bring in the archetypal, and it's like, what's being invited out of your life in this space. So
Well, it I thought I was hip. I thought it was cool. I felt everything too until, I started doing somatic work. And then it was like, holy shit. It was like, to me, it was discovering a great lake in my backyard. Okay. But then as I hung out more and more, there's these differentiations and they start to happen. And so for me, the fear, as you guys were talking, I was remembering and feeling, and it's actually a blended feeling. There's two things there where it's like some of it is mine, but some of it isn't mine. And so that's just very, and yesterday all I did was just, say my prayers, and just, the prayer I came away from Maya was, that it's not my job to like cover all the bases and be the great protector to make myself safe on planet Earth, right? That's God's job for me. And like my job is to relax and then to respond. It's just to respond, and I wait in quiet certainty that I will do what is asked of me to do when it comes. Show me what to do. And when I crested over the little fear hump, it did feel pretty good, But it was just like it was a reminder of that thing that happened a couple of months ago. I was like, oh, still there.
and those are the things like when the emotions come, and I see this with clients all the time. It's like they don't want to feel the thing that they're being invited into, but yet sometimes that's the way, right? That's the way to the other
Right.
side.
Yeah, you have to like move towards the fear and go through it, because there is a protector part that is not certain that you're not going to die if you feel this thing, or if you let this thing go, like what's going to be there to protect you. And so it's this really like delicate navigation of being like, who am I? Where am I? When am I? What is this? Where's it coming? Like there's so much like proprioception and just like feeling out the energy, and like there's nothing about it that's like super logical even. Like I
Yeah.
kind of wish it was, but there's what I've noticed with clients is when I'm doing parts work with them and we're unburdening and just liberating these parts, like they're like, I'm beyond words. And I'm like, I think that's the right direction. When we get to a place where we have an experience, a sensation, we're transforming emotions, and you can feel the energy, you can feel the alchemy of it. You know that you're lighter because, and this is like wild to think of, but like, we can heal in the 3D, but also we have this very powerful potential to work in like the 5D beyond space and time and through imagination, because we're not bound by anything. There's so much healing we can do there that is actually affecting us energetically, vibrationally right now. And some of our best work, I believe a lot of our best work comes from there, because we're not confined by the reality of, this like 3D reality where you have to literally like act things out, and you can't always act things out, because if you do, you go to jail, you know.
Very true.
Yeah. Well, do we have time to, I kind of feel like maybe it would be good to talk a little bit about I think like personal responsibility for the healing journey, also the responsibility of practitioners, of those delivering medicine, of journalists reporting on these different modalities, and how we can, instead of like demonizing or vilifying people, like I do believe there's an importance in holding ourselves accountable, holding other people accountable. But I also understand until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. You will call it fate, Carl Jung, or you'll feel victimized and be like, fuck you, you victimize me, not realizing within ourselves that we actually were, having a hand in the perpetration of that victimization because we just didn't know any better. Like our naivete and perhaps excitement got us into something where we were way over our heads. And then, humans tinkering with different modalities, different substances, we don't always know what we're getting into. So I would love to hear some of your thoughts in how people can best prepare and not bite off more than they can chew and be responsible, because these altered states, whether you're accessing them through breath work or psychedelics or parts work or whatever, altered states are happening. And of course, there's a potential for re-traumatization. So
Yeah.
thoughts?
We talk a lot about, so it's interesting, kind of backing into the therapy world after having the experience of coaching. The therapy world is run by core principles of beneficence and non-malfeasance and autonomy and justice. And I forgot the last one, it'll come to me. But part of that undergirds every therapeutic approach, right? And therapists have to do something called informed consent, which is you get the consent of the other person that you are working with, the client, in order to work through a healing modality with them. And they have to be informed of the healing modality before they can give consent, right? So they have to know, if I'm going to do EMDR with you, this is kind of what can happen, right? If I am going to do brain spotting with you or IFS, like you will go subcortical, you will go into your, below your prefrontal cortex, and there could be some different things. I have a protocol with my clients where if we have a brain spotting session, the next day they know they have to text, call, send an email, carrier pigeon, something. It's a 24-hour check-in, because I've had people with brain spotting who've been like, I ran into a couple walls today. Well, yeah, because it changes you somatically. It changes how you are connecting. So I'm always, I always do make sure that I have emergency numbers for all my people, and that I can, in case anything happens, because there are a lot of safety things that have to go into the work that we do, because we are sitting on top of trauma. And then from a client perspective, they've got to be aware, right? So if they're going to go do, like, I can't do, I'm a 12-stepper, so I am 6 years sober from alcohol. Aya and all of the psychedelics, I believe in their power. It's not in the cards for me, not because it creates an altered state, right? And I've been reticent with breath work for the same reason, because that altered state in some people can hijack and create a craving mechanism in their brain. So, especially for addicts, they've got to be really, really careful that it's not becoming some spiritualized, addiction for them. So knowing what it is that you're going to do as a client, knowing that it comes from a certain context, right? So medicine work comes from an indigenous context. How are the indigenous roots of that medicine work being celebrated, right? Is the Aya grown naturally? Is it um, grown with intention and in the sacred context, because, you know, white people love to come along and find a new modality, bring it into a sanitized clinical sphere, and call it new medicine and divorce it from the context that it was birthed in. And then the people going through the protocol are missing the contextual elements that are a part of the healing. And I see that with some of the, some of the new stuff that's out. And so I think, going back to your original question, how can you be wise about this? Learn about the modalities, learn about the practitioner you're working with, right? What are the safety protocols in place? If you're getting on the phone with somebody who's doing, or I'm sorry, on Zoom with somebody who's doing deep subcortical somatic experiencing or brain spotting, and they don't even have an emergency number for you, like there's a problem, right? Because the safety protocols aren't in place to keep you safe. So I think doing some of your homework on that is really, really, really critical. So
Okay. It's good to know. Yeah, and you know, I know some of that stuff is challenging too, because sometimes people are like estranged from a support system, especially since trauma tends to cause people to isolate or go up in their heads, or maybe some like they don't necessarily have safe relationships. And yeah, it can be a challenge to say, well, like, who's your support system, or do you have an emergency number, or how, like, if we're touching on this, like, how will you stay safe? Or yeah, I remember doing some work. It was EFT, but it was emotionally focused therapy. And our therapist would not see us, like, I forget what the deal was. We had to be together in one place, and we had to have like an emergency number, but we couldn't be in two different places. I don't remember why it was, but it was a pain in the ass, honestly. And it was never really necessary for that. But I also understand you don't always know, like when you're doing work with people and some of the things that you're touching on. And of course, especially with like plant medicines or altered states, like there's a potential for psychosis or all different kinds of things. So I feel like it's important to do the work and like vetting, like as a practitioner, to like vet your clients and understand, okay, what kinds of experiences have you had before with different therapists, different modalities? What can we expect based on your history? And then also, yeah, for the clients, like what has their experience been with practitioners, like, and then even practitioners knowing their limits, knowing like the scope of what they're doing, which sometimes in with all these like different modalities and coaching, it's a little bit like the wild west kind of. And I like, you kind of see the full spectrum. And I think obviously we can't know everything, but it's important to like to be accountable and to just say, like, how do I continue to improve myself? How do I do better? Like if I had a situation with a client where I felt like I could have done more or could have created a better welcoming or opening container and exit container and all those things. So I think it's just one of those things where it's like we do our best, and then we try to learn what we don't know, and which is hard because we don't always know what we don't know until sometimes we're getting kicked in the ass by it, and we're like, shit, I didn't know that I didn't know that.
well, and the other thing we can do as practitioners, and I think this is something that I would love to see built into the coaching space, it is natural for the therapeutic space, but it is not in the coaching space, is regular case consultation and supervision. Like the therapists have that on lock, and it's very effective in helping people get trained and comfortable and competent as they launch into their practice. And even after that, right? I made the decision when I started coaching, I would always have, I call him my coaching supervisor. It's not supervisory as like therapeutic supervisor. It's more like case consultation, but I have an accountability system where I go weekly and I meet in a supervision quad and I bring cases and I get consultation on it because I know that I hit up against my limits all the time. And I would love to see that be more mandated and more normalized in the coaching space because I think a lot of coaches could really use some supervisors out there. So,
Yeah. I think it's something like that, or like a mastermind where you can come together and have like a round table. And but what I also recognize is like there's beautiful things about coaching that I think has really helped, like has even helped like therapy. You know what I mean? Because I believe they actually greatly help each other. And I think there's things that both modalities could learn, like they could really take a lot from each other in that. Some of the structure from, and like the checks and balances from the therapeutic thing, like the therapy maybe learning some, maybe some more mentoring, or maybe focusing on more glimmers, or 5D like emotional work where you're like tapping into good feelings and practicing holding those states. So yeah.
modalities that are definitely going in that direction. It used to be that therapy didn't really move you into forward-looking goal setting, and now that is very normal in therapy. What is it? Brief solution focused therapy. I was reading it about a month ago for my class, and I'm like, this is coaching. This is just like coaching. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's
I
good.
agree. I would love to see, the bridge between both worlds learn from each other. So
That's
Yeah,
you. You're doing that.
yeah,
you're the
and
bridge.
I always say I'm not a therapist, I'm not a coach. I'm a theracoach. That's where, and
Mhm.
it'll be interesting once I get licensed how that's going to express itself
Mm.
because I want to help my clients look forward. And that's inherently, coaching. Yes, therapy does that, but in a very different way. And so there are some more directive aspects of the coaching that I do want to pull in. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what the final form of my work is. I'm excited to have the opportunity to do it.
I
So
love
Jenny,
watching. What's that?
go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I love watching my friends. I have like some friends that are moving from like John. I don't know if you know John Eli, but he was on our
Yes.
podcast before. Yeah, so he moved from being a pastor to being a coach, trauma informed coach, and now a trauma therapist. And then we had someone on the podcast that moved from being a therapist and went. So I have a lot of friends that moved from therapy into coaching, and
Yes.
it's just so fascinating. Like I love seeing it, and I think for those of us that are really called to do this work, like I know that we want to help people, and integrity has to be a big part of that, and it's not like a money grab thing, which is kind of scary, when people are just they want to get into it because they're but I don't think that will ultimately stick, because you got to know what you're doing in order to stay in and actually work in this field. Like it's not for the faint of heart at all, and it's not just like a hobby. It's not a hobby kind of thing.
Very true.
Yeah,
Jenny, I was checking out your website a little bit. Nice website, by the way.
Thanks.
What are some of your offerings right now?
Yeah. So my biggest one is the core love wounds quiz. So I'm helping people decode their core love wounds.
Cool.
So the thought behind that is if you can identify basically what is the wound that is inhibiting your stepping forward for healthy relationships, then you can start to clear the path towards healthy relationships because your wounds are going to create a relationship pattern that you're using to try and get your needs met. So if you can identify and say, oh, this is what I'm struggling with, then it gives you, it helps you really clear the path to get to where you're trying to go in relationships. So that has been the latest offer. And I've got I just did a few classes, but what else? I think the core love wounds quiz really is the biggie.
Yeah,
So
so that one's on your website,
yeah,
http://jennyrain.com, and the quiz /quiz, but we'll put that in our notes. Um, yeah. Is there
thank
anything else you would like to sign off with? Any final thoughts?
no, this has been awesome. I always love talking to y'all. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on the
Yeah,
podcast.
thank you for coming. I love geeking out on all these things, and you just never know like the conversations that come out of it. So it's exciting. It's fun.
I'm sorry I was tough to schedule. I'm dialed in now.
It's okay.
Well,
It's
you
a
moved, like you had a lot going on.
There
It's
was
fair.
some stuff going on.
Yeah, no worries.
Anyway, I really appreciate you coming, Jenny. It was really great to get to know you and talk to you.
yeah, same. I really enjoyed it. Enjoyed it.
All right.
That it? So emotional?
Signing off. Bye everyone. Thanks for joining
Goodbye.
us.